This time on The Greats, the Wright brothers discover the miracle of flight. From Hanoi Jane to human rights campaigner. Albert Einstein, the man behind the genius. And Queen Elizabeth II, monarch of the century. But first, he was a powerful orator, a charismatic leader, and one of the greatest Americans of all time. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led a revolution in the 1950s and 60s that ended racial segregation and pushed civil rights to the forefront of the political agenda. King excelled academically and graduated with a PhD in theology. He was only 24 when he became pastor at a Baptist church in Alabama and quickly gained a reputation with authorities for being an agitator.
Well, the jail experience is never an easy experience. The loneliness of jail, the frustration of jail, the lack of communication with outside always brings with it real problems.
King rocketed to prominence as the leader of the Montgomery bus boycott in 1955, a response to Rosa Parks' arrest for refusing to give up her seat to a white man, as required under the Jim Crow law. King was arrested and his house firebombed during the campaign, but it led to a United States Supreme Court decision that the segregation laws were unconstitutional. King found himself tapping into a powerful mood for protest and change. Feelings ran strongly within the African American community, and he opposed violence, and through the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, made churches the forefront of the struggle for racial equality. King's success as an agent for social change was viewed with suspicion by the FBI, and they put him under surveillance in an attempt to gather evidence that communists were infiltrating the civil rights movement. No such evidence was forthcoming, so the agency attempted to blackmail King into abandoning his public role. It threatened to reveal potentially embarrassing information gleaned from wiretaps and bugs, but King refused to be intimidated. An admirer of Mahatma Gandhi, King traveled to India and said, "Since being in India, I am more convinced than ever before that the method of non-violence resistance is the most potent weapon available to oppressed people in their struggle for justice and human dignity." The March on Washington for Freedom and Equality was King's most famous protest. 250,000 Americans from many different racial backgrounds marched on the nation's capital to demand an end to racial segregation, legislation to ensure racial equality, and protection for civil rights workers from police brutality. It was at this demonstration that King gave his historic speech, "I Have a Dream." The following year, King became the youngest ever recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize and had the ears of the world when he delivered his acceptance speech.
I must ask why this prize is awarded to a movement which is beleaguered and committed to unrelenting struggle.
Throughout the 1960s, King worked to build bridges between civil rights groups and mobilize social protesters. He took his family to live in Chicago's slums to highlight the injustices faced by Northern African Americans. King also spoke out against the Vietnam War, questioning why the United States government was propping up the dictators of Southeast Asia. He met Nation of Islam leader Malcolm X many times, but refused to renounce his policy of anti-violence. King's politics made him the target of hate from a range of people, and he constantly faced threats of violence. But the civil rights leader refused to be cowed. On the evening of April the 4th, 1968, he was standing on the balcony of his motel in Memphis, Tennessee, when an assassin fired several shots at him. An hour later, King was pronounced dead at the hospital. An entire nation was plunged into mourning. "300,000 people attended his funeral, and many millions more mourned the man who, more than any other, had brought lasting changes to the conditions and attitudes endured by black Americans.
And we know that as long as the Negro in this county, as well as over other sections of the state, can't vote, then many of the other conditions that exist will continue to exist.
On the 17th of December, 1903, Orville Wright sent his father Milton a telegram. It said Orville and his brother Wilbur had made 4 successful flights using engine power alone, and that his father should inform the newspapers. The Wright brothers had just entered the record books. Orville and Wilbur both took turns to pilot the Wright Flyer, and in the process became the first people on Earth to make a controlled, powered flight. Born into a close middle-class family in the Midwestern United States, the brothers grew up in Dayton, Ohio, towards the end of the 19th century. When the boys were aged 8 and 12, they were given a toy helicopter powered with a rubber band. The toy broke, so they built their own. As young men, the brothers opened their own bicycle sales and repair shop. The business proved profitable. America was in the grip of a cycling craze, and the Wright brothers designed and manufactured some popular bicycles. The business provided funds for the brothers to indulge in their real passion, aviation. Their sister Catherine took over the business, so Orville and Wilbur could devote more time to designing flying machines. Wilbur came up with a plan to use cables to draw the struts and spars of a glider together, so one side tilted up and the other side down. Unlike other aeroplane prototypes, the pilot would actually have control. Wilbur tested his theory on a box kite. It worked. So in 1899, he and Orville built a full-sized glider. They chose the tiny town of Kitty Hawk in South Carolina as the venue for testing, as the windy area had plenty of wide-open spaces and good weather. Through trial and error, they progressed from flying the glider as a kite to manned flights. The brothers designed and built their own engine in only 6 weeks. The historic 17th of December flight was not recorded as a moving picture, but this film of a later flight made by the brothers gives a sense of the momentous occasion.
Wind was gusting at 30 miles an hour. They were flying into that stiff wind. Orville took off that morning, and in 40 feet he was off the ground. The plane in that stiff wind was porpoising up and down. It would go into a dive. It was difficult for Orville to fly that plane that morning, but he was determined to stay in the air as far as he could. He was in the air for 8 seconds, 10 seconds. 12 seconds later, 120 feet from the starting point, Orville landed that plane here at the #1 stone marker. It was only 12 seconds, 120 feet, but that was the first time man was able to break those bonds with the Earth with a powered flyer.
The brothers made 3 more flights, with Wilbur piloting the flyer more than 800 feet. For the next 2 years, they refined their designs until developing the Flyer 5, the first aircraft able to take off and land under pilot control. The patent they took out in 1906 covered the method of varying wing angle to control an aircraft, and the brothers fought several court battles against other aviators. The court cases took their toll, and Wilbur died of typhoid in 1912, and the brothers' most famous aircraft, Flyer 1, can be seen today at the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C.
Well, before 1903, what you heard people say was, if God had wanted us to fly, he would have given us wings. After 1903, what you heard was, gosh, if we can do that, what can't we do? Flight had been the definition of the impossible for so long that when Wilbur and Orville actually did it, it seemed to open all sorts of doors to new possibilities and shape the history of the century.
The Flyer's label reads, "By original scientific research, the Wright brothers discovered the principles of human flight. As inventors, builders, and flyers, they further developed the aeroplane, taught man to fly, and opened the era of aviation." Like Barrymore or Houston, the name Fonda denotes Hollywood royalty. And in an illustrious clan that includes her father Henry, brother Peter, and niece Bridget, it is Jane who has had the most extraordinary life. The daughter of Henry Fonda and socialite Francis Ford Seymour was born in December 1937. Following her father's footsteps, she quickly forged a successful acting career. She received the first Best Actress Oscar nomination in 1970 for the grueling but gripping drama They Shoot Horses, Don't They?, before winning the award for Clute in 1972 and Coming Home in 1979. At the same time, Jane was becoming increasingly known for her political views and activism. In 1970, with Fred Gardner and Clute co-star Donald Sutherland, she formed the FTA Tour, dubbed a political vaudeville response to Bob Hope's USO tour. Most notoriously, she caused a firestorm of protest when photographed in Vietnam, sitting on an anti-aircraft gun, which had been used against the American Air Force. Passionately committed to charity work, Jane has long been a mass of contradictions. A global sex symbol in her early career, she nevertheless identifies as a staunch feminist and remains fiercely political, campaigning against the war in Iraq and on such issues as female genital mutilation. Her film career was still going well in the 80s, with impressive work in films like On Golden Pond and 9 to 5.
It makes me real happy that it's had this kind of life. You know, it doesn't surprise me, but I talk to a lot of young people. I work with young people in Georgia where I live, and they love the movie. You know, they learn to look at it because of their parents, and it's a favorite movie of a lot of young people. So that makes me feel good that it's held up like that.
But her private life has been less successful, with the failure of her 3 marriages to French film director Roger Vadim, politician Tom Hayden, and cable television mogul Ted Turner. However, she remained close to Vadim and was among the mourners at his funeral in 2000. Jane announced her retirement from screen acting at the beginning of the 90s, but 14 years later changed her mind and has since appeared in a couple of films. She was one of the few to defend her Georgia Rules co-star, Lindsay Lohan.
You got to have more in your life than celebrity, because celebrity doesn't last, and then you'll be left with nothing. And the other thing is, it's not a dress rehearsal. You know, this is life, and you know, if you blow it, you may not get another chance.
She discovered some familiar emotions in the script about a mother and daughter's reconciliation.
I felt some of the same things that I felt while I was, makes me emotional, when I was doing On Golden Pond. You know, it's about healing and forgiveness where there's been dysfunction, and don't we all know about dysfunction? So it's quite universal.
Jane found unexpected inspiration when creating her over-the-top mother-in-law character in Monster-in-Law.
Ted Turner, actually. I spent, you know, a good, wonderful 10 years with him, and he's a very over-the-top kind of flamboyant, outrageous character that's also lovable, and so I kind of learned, watching and being with him, what that might look like. So he kind of inspired me. He's not a monster, but he inspired me in kind of being outrageous.
In 2001, she embraced Christianity, another surprising life choice. But the world learned long ago that for a woman as colorful as Jane Fonda, anything is possible. One of the surest signs that a person has achieved true greatness is when their name enters the dictionary as a noun. And on that count, Albert Einstein certainly qualifies. The world's most renowned physicist was born in Ulm, Germany, in March 1879. As a young boy, he would build models and mechanical devices just for fun, and his flair for mathematics quickly blossomed. After renouncing his German citizenship to avoid conscription and settling in Switzerland, in 1900 he gained a physics degree at ETH, the Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. At the time, there was just one woman studying mathematics at ETH, Mileva Maric. In 1903, she and Einstein were married. Together they had 2 sons and a daughter. The daughter was born before the Einsteins married, and she was put up for adoption, though her eventual fate remains a mystery. About this time, Einstein found a job at the patent office in Bern. Much of his work there was related to his later interests, especially in the areas of electrical signal transmission and synchronization of time. He began publishing his work. 1905's output became known collectively as the Annus Mirabilis, or Miracle Year Papers. In particular, he was examining the photoelectric effect of light, Brownian motion, electrodynamics, and the equivalence of matter and energy. It was this investigation that paved the way for his most famous theory, E equals mc squared, which suggested that tiny amounts of mass could be converted into huge amounts of energy. In 1921, Einstein received the Nobel Prize in Physics, particularly for his discovery of the law of the photoelectric effect. The Nobel Prize money, however, went to his wife Mileva as part of the settlement from their divorce, which was finalized in early 1919. During the 1920s, Einstein traveled and lectured, gaining fellowships and memberships of all the important scientific academies across the globe. In 1929, the great German physicist and founder of quantum theory presented Einstein with the inaugural Max Planck Medal in Berlin. As he continued working on the foundation of quantum mechanics, entering into a long series of debates with Niels Bohr, each of them amicably countering the other's theories. In 1940, Einstein dedicated the Wall of Fame at the World's Fair, using the occasion to give voice to his fervent anti-racism. He had strong ties with activists like Paul Robeson and believed the treatment of African Americans was shameful. This country still has a heavy debt to discharge for all the troubles and disabilities it has laid on the Negro's shoulders, he said, adding, "The more I feel an American, the more this situation pains me. I can escape the feeling of complicity in it only by speaking out." As Einstein's fame grew, he found himself traveling the world to meet eminent scholars and political figures. He was popular for his frank speaking, although his Jewish heritage meant he was unwelcome in Nazi Germany, where his work was blacklisted. In 1939, he was consulted by a group of nuclear physicists afraid that the recent discovery of nuclear fission could lead to bombs with devastating capabilities. Agreeing there was reason to fear the Nazis getting access to such weapons, Einstein signed a letter to American President Franklin D. Roosevelt, urging the U.S. government to prepare for nuclear warfare. To cement his allegiance, in 1940, Einstein became an American citizen while retaining his Swiss citizenship. In his later years, he suffered from ill health, finally succumbing to a ruptured aortic aneurysm in his adopted hometown of Princeton, New Jersey, on the 17th of April, 1955. In 1999, Time magazine named him Person of the Century, calling him the genius among geniuses who discovered merely by thinking about it that the universe was not as it seemed. The last King of England and the United Kingdom was the much-loved George VI, who ruled from 1936 through to his death in 1952. In February of that year, after surgery for lung cancer, he died from a heart attack at the age of 56. He left behind his wife Elizabeth, who became the Queen Mother, and his 2 daughters, Elizabeth, who was born in 1926, and Margaret, who was 4 years younger. On the 2nd of June 1953, at the age of 27, Elizabeth was crowned Queen. By this time, she'd already been married for 5 years to Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. Over half a century later, Elizabeth II still sits on the throne, having survived and thrived, while barely putting a foot wrong throughout her entire reign. As the head of state of 16 countries, the Queen's position is more symbolic than political, although she is famously well informed about the intricacies of the political process. In contrast to centuries gone by, the role of the monarch in the United Kingdom is now very much that of a figurehead. Her duties include performing tasks like presiding over the opening of Gatwick Airport, which she did 5 years into her reign on the 9th of June 1958.
I'm sure that this airport has a great future before it. I congratulate all those who, by their labor, their planning, and their skill, have played a part in building it. And I wish good fortune to all those who will use it. I have great pleasure in declaring Gatwick Airport open.
Out of all the members of the current royal family, it is the Queen who is most mindful of the notions of duty and protocol. Unlike her predecessor, Elizabeth I, who went to her grave childless, this Queen took care of the succession question early by marrying young and obligingly providing 4 heirs, 3 of whom were boys. The Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, who was born in 1948, is now first in line as heir to the throne, followed by his 2 sons, William and Harry. During her long reign, the Queen has met many of the most notable people of the last 50 years, including Marilyn Monroe, to whom she was introduced at a Royal Command performance of The Prince and the Showgirl in 1957. In the same year, she was a guest of President Eisenhower, who made an elaborate toast to her at a White House state dinner in her honor. Her reign has now encompassed the tenures of 10 American presidents, including Richard Nixon, who visited her in England in 1970. In her own country, she has seen the coming and going of 11 prime ministers. Other world leaders she has met include Indira Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, and the Shah of Iran, who visited England in 1948. During her reign, she has also witnessed the dissolution of the former British Empire and the evolution of the modern Commonwealth of Nations, which includes countries like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. She remains Queen of all the Commonwealth realms, though holds almost no political power, and is represented in each by a Governor-General. In the United Kingdom, the monarchy and all of its trappings play a significant role in the tourism industry. Throughout her reign, the Queen has taken part in the annual Trooping of the Colour in front of large crowds, while spectators turn up at her London residence, Buckingham Palace, on a daily basis to watch the changing of the guard.